Energy liberation, the threat to meters. To see why the hammer falls hardest on energy, follow the invoice. Every house, factory, base, metered. That meter is a subscription disguised as infrastructure. Break the subscription and you don't just lower a bill, you remove leverage, prices steer elections. Fuel contracts steady currencies, maintenance becomes patronage. A garage device that delivers steady power isn't a gadget, it's an unvoted policy. Policy gets defended. Engineers kept pushing anyway along 3 routes. First, turn waste heat into electricity with no moving parts. Second, sip power from the environment so small loads never need the grid. Third, make liquid fuels locally so pipelines stop being choke points. Different paths, same threat. Recurring revenue becomes a one-time purchase. Start in the rooms that run too hot. Foundries, data centers, refineries, rivers of heat blown into the air. For decades, the promise was solid-state converters that turn a temperature difference into current. Early thermionics needed furnaces. Later, nano-engineered surfaces nudged emission toward room temperature. Quiet sheets on warm walls produced a whisper of power, multiplied by surface area into real money. Patent families split into continuations. Licenses drifted to holding companies. The public line stayed safe, promising, not yet scalable. Behind fences, pilots shaved peak draw where press couldn't see, and forecasts looked strangely off. Why do slivers matter? Industrial math add up the fractions. 5% off a plant's draw moves profit, cancels capex, and disturbs the debt beneath it. That's when standards bodies ask for lifetime data, insurers invent new categories, and regulators wonder about uncharacterized emissions from shielded leads. Each request seems prudent. Together, they become a maze. Startups miss runways while incumbents bank rate cases on yesterday's load. Meanwhile, honest scavenging got practical, not free energy bookkeeping. Cities leak power in radio, vibration, temperature flicker. Ultra-low power chips made those scraps useful. Rural co-ops anchored soil sensors in the wash of FM towers and the hum of grain dryers. Nodes woke, measured, whispered across phone to phone mesh, then slept. No batteries to swap, no trucks to roll. A storm snapped poles, the mesh rerouted like water. For 6 weeks, the town had data without bills. Then envelopes arrived. Firmware locks bricked nodes until they phoned home. Security, updates disabled sideloading on municipal devices unless a portal fee cleared. Regulators forwarded friendly reminders about authorization for equipment that didn't even transmit. The effect was simple: keep endpoints dependent. Skeptics shrug, harvesters don't threaten big meters, but cut millions of tiny bills, batteries, service visits, carrier plans, and you hollow quiet revenue columns that fund the center. Each self-sufficient node is a small veto on someone else's forecast. Enough vetoes shift the balance. Then came the fuel lever. Cities and militaries need energy that stores, pours, and survives logistics. Synthetic fuels, CO2 plus hydrogen back into diesel, kerosene, gasoline, always failed on cost. Catalysts and electrolyzers bent the curve. A municipal site captured flue CO2, used off-peak wind to split water and fed a compact reactor. Output hit diesel spec. Buses ran cleaner. Optimization pause followed. Interconnection studies reopened over harmonics. Insurance riders spiked. An oil-aligned investor bought control. Strategic review, staff said the tech worked. The rollout had timing risk. Defense ran its own quiet trials. Bases don't like convoys. Container units drank seawater, harvested CO2, split hydrogen with nighttime baseload, and synthesized JP8. Engines wore normally. Reports stayed inside. Orders didn't. Public markets never got the signal. You saw smaller skirmishes everywhere. Thin-film solar hit sub-dollar per watt in small runs long before it hit shelves. Tooling was bought, then mothballed after acquisitions. Trade complaints raised import costs. Incumbents inked long PPAs under yesterday's prices. A couple of towns slipped through. Solar canopies over parking lots, storage from an unacquired startup, islanding firmware published openly. After the next storm, their grocery aisles stayed cold and their pumps worked. Reporters called it luck. The spreadsheet called it threat modeling. Battery stories rhymed. High-density chemistries flashed better energy and brutal fast-charge life. A stealth buy followed. Roadmaps aligned to legacy cells. Spec sheets vanished. Teams were absorbed. Supercapacitors with million-cycle lives impressed utilities in DMOS. Partners insisted on exclusivity. Founders signed, product names changed to developer kit, and nothing shipped. Permitting became a weapon of attrition. Tidal microturbines that hum under predictable currents met navigation reviews that never ended. Local wind that would stabilize microgrids faced wildlife studies cloned across counties. Storage systems that competed with demand response triggered sudden safety bulletins. None of it looked like sabotage. All of it felt like delay. The human beats keep this from turning into theory. A plant manager who watched a heat harvest pilot cut peak draw by 3% got an email from corporate finance asking why load forecasts justifying a bond issue had shifted. A co-op engineer taught teenagers to flash mesh firmware before a carrier update killed sideloading. A process lead topped a drum of synthetic diesel before a pause and kept a hospital generator alive when tankers couldn't dock. Limits exist. Thermionics at near ambient fight degradation. Harvesters can't run fridges. Synthetic fuel costs depend on cheap power and catalyst life, but those are engineering curves and they're bending. The unusual part isn't the physics, it's how predictably interference arrives when bills disappear. So you learn the rule set. When a box in your garage turns a subscription into an appliance, standards multiply. When a sensor runs on air, firmware grows a leash. When a town prints fuel from wind and waste, interconnects reopen. Interest pressure pause. And yet some units keep humming behind doors with hand-painted signs, some meshes keep breathing when towers go dark, and somewhere a bus still runs on a drum labeled in Sharpie. Solid-state power, the room-temp thermionic dream. The first rumor sounded like boiler room folklore. 2 polished plates, a hair of vacuum, a measurable temperature difference, and a steady trickle of current with no moving parts. Early thermionics in the 1940s and 1950s needed heat you could feel across a room. This version flirted with ambient. If it held, a factory wall became a generator, an exhaust stack a quiet charger, a data center's heat a feed for its own sensors. To see why that mattered, go to a lab notebook in 1962 where an engineer logged currents that refused to vanish into noise. He stacked wafers, tuned coatings, shaved work functions like a locksmith. When the room warmed, the curve lifted. When a winter draft crept in, it sank. Not perpetual, just stubborn. A provisional patent landed months later. Continuations multiplied, claims narrowed, and a license transferred to a Delaware holding company with no product catalog and a very good lawyer. What nobody outside the badge readers saw, 2 pilot tiles went to a field partner. One returned dented with no feedback. The other never came back. The inventor, call him Alex, sat across from a man who never touched the coffee and signed a buyout with an advisory role and a clause that reached into his future. No independent work, substantially similar in purpose or effect. He moved apartments. He stopped answering emails from old colleagues. Meanwhile, materials science crawled closer to the dream. Nanostructured emitters etched forests of sharp tips. Low work function coatings fought degradation. Microvacuum gaps stabilized with MEMS tricks. Thermoelectronic quietly replaced thermionic in abstracts. A university demo lit an LED on a hot plate with a palm cooling the other side. The video made it to forums, then disappeared behind a tech transfer claim. The grad student defended, then took a private sector job at a firm famous for buying IP it never shipped. Stakes were simple enough to write in a CFO email. A thin, bolt-on sheet that harvests a few % of a hot surface at scale-dense baseload forecasts. Dented forecasts weaken rate cases and the debt they anchor. Weak debt moves stock. That's when standards committees ask for cycling data that takes years, insurers want a certification category that doesn't exist, and a regulator wonders whether unshielded leads might radiate uncharacterized signatures, even when they're shielded and the signatures aren't there. Each request reads reasonable. In sequence, they become a runway eater. While that was happening in New York, a foundry in Texas tested arrayed emitters gated like a field emission display wired backward. A glass plant wrapped a section of furnace with tiles, saw a 3% shave off peak, and noticed cooling loads eased. The company's next press release used a phrase engineers dread, refocusing on core competencies. A week later, the IP portfolio grew by acquisition, and pilot units were recalled for upgrades. They never reappeared. Defense labs, as usual, had a different motivation: stealth and resilience. A sealed room ran racks with thermoelectronic skins that scavenged waste heat for monitoring while passively cooling hot spots. No fans, no signatures, papers didn't publish. Budgets did. The grid world never saw a spec sheet. Skeptics have fair arrows. Near-ambient emission fights contamination, drift, and fatigue. Maintaining microgaps across seasons is hard. Matching lab-grade vacuum tricks with factory abuse is harder. But hard isn't fake, and pilots that shave real kilowatts tell their own story. The pattern we watched wasn't hype collapsing under physics. It was credible gains slowed by admin gravity. A micro story cuts cleaner than any chart. In 2021, a Midwestern plant manager watched telemetry during a 6-week thermoelectronic trial. Peaks softened, cooling compressors cycled less, and the Thursday forecast he sent corporate shaved just enough to nudge a bond conversation. Finance asked for consistency. The pilot extension slid behind a broader review, and the crate left the dock with a return label and silence inside. Another vignette. A vineyard strapped tiles to fermentation rooms to reclaim the warmth of yeast. Not a revolution, just enough edge to run pumps off hours and keep a genset quiet. They posted a photo. A distributor forwarded a friendly reminder about equipment approval categories that didn't include energy scavenging panels. They moved the photo to a private chat and kept the panels. Here's the quiet impact. Even at single-digit efficiency, thermoelectronic skins on ovens, kilns, smelters, engine bays, and racks add up to city-scale megawatts you don't buy. Prices move at the margins. If enough walls make their own trickle, the grid's leverage thins where it's fattest. Predictable demand. That's when the maze shows up. Lifetime tests longer than cash. Harmonized standards that harmonize to yesterday. Safety reviews scoped to mechanical generators applied to sealed sheets. Limits remain. Coatings fatigue. Seals fail, fouling happens, but those are engineering curves and they bend with use. What bends slower is permission. The buyouts keep coming, the NDAs keep stretching. The phrase pre-commercial keeps buying time for everyone except the team paying rent. The last note is human. Alex kept tinkering in his kitchen anyway, different geometry, new gaps, the same itch. He never shipped a product under his name again. But somewhere behind a door with a hand-painted sign, a warm wall hums slightly less than it used to, and a breaker trips a little later on hot afternoons. That whisper is the dream, not free energy, just less to rent. Ambient energy harvesters, radio, vibration, and the air around us. If heat gave you a trickle, the air gave you a whisper, and whispers add up when circuits learn to live on almost nothing. This wasn't magic, it was bookkeeping. Cities leak energy all day. Radio broadcasts, Wi-Fi splash, cell towers, switching supplies that sing in harmonics, doors that slam, rails that hum, pipes that tremble, walls that breathe temperature. For a century, crystal radios proved you could listen on the signal itself. The modern twist was silicon that sipped nanowatts and woke only to speak. Stakes first. When devices live on scraps, you stop paying to keep them alive. No battery budgets, no truck rolls to swap coin cells, no service contracts to monitor a thing that can monitor itself. One node is a neat trick. 10,000 across a town is a line item gone. The people who sell the tires, the batteries, the plans, and the dashboards feel that subtraction before anyone else reads a press release. Action looks small at first. A land-grant lab-tuned postage stamp rectinas to the local FM band and paired them with ultra-low leakage capacitors. In fields outside town, soil probes woke every hour, measured moisture and conductivity, relayed a few bytes through a sleepy mesh, and went back to dreaming, all from the wash of radio a tractor cab can't hear. A county agriculture office watched water use drop and fuel costs follow. The farmer's summary was cleaner. I don't send anyone out there anymore. Meanwhile, in a transit system that couldn't afford outages, vibration-powered housekeeping. Millimeter piezo strips sat under rails and turnstiles, trickled charging caps that fed safety beacons and counters. The old plan called for quarterly battery changes and surprise failures. The new plan called for a sweep once a year to dust. Maintenance loved it until legal flagged RF compliance. The devices didn't transmit. The memo didn't care. What nobody outside the utility hallways saw was the phone call sequence when a rural co-op built a real mesh. Line-of-sight nodes on silos, phone-to-phone relays in pockets, and harvesters on the edge. A blizzard took poles, the network rerouted like water. Wells pinged, gates opened, frost lines reported. 6 weeks later, envelopes arrived. A carrier-piloted managed IoT, offering certified modules and remote updates. The co-op's endpoints ran open firmware. A security update on branded phones disabled sideloading unless devices enrolled in a portal with a fee and a clause. Remote disable to preserve network integrity. A regulator forwarded friendly reminders about equipment authorization for devices that only listened. A baseband patch bricked a third of the nodes until they re-enrolled. The sales team called 5 minutes later. Stakes sharpened in spreadsheets. Batteries are quiet money. Procurement, disposal, labor lost sensors when schedules slip. Replace tens of thousands with boards that eat RF crumbs and vibration, and you erase a revenue column that pays for the center. Add mesh hops that prefer neighbors over towers, and you soften a bill that underwrites fiber and uplinks. None of this looks dramatic on a map. It looks like the middle getting thinner. Action kept multiplying. In a high-rise, a Nordic startup tuned scavengers to office soup, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, RFID doors, and fed e-ink occupancy tags. Cleaners hit rooms that needed them. Property managers smiled until an integrator's survey flagged unauthorized radios. The tags didn't radiate. The rollout paused pending risk assessment. In schools, thermoelectric slivers on window frames lived on daily temperature swing and powered CO2 sensors. Headaches fell when windows opened at the right time. A facility's memo demanded battery replacement plans. There were no batteries. A hospital trial strapped harvesters to bed rails to track utilization. Biomed loved the uptime. It demanded cloud authentication for endpoints that didn't speak to the cloud. Then the smear cycle kicked in. Trade press ran a soft headline. Are energy harvesters a safety risk? The concerns were fog, unknown electromagnetic effects, privacy, ending on a quote about standardized gateways and managed updates. Translation, harvest, but through us. The same week, a carrier pushed a firmware hardening that blocked peer-to-peer radios unless a SIM was blessed. Municipal crews found their side-loaded mesh app refused to launch after an update. The vendor offered a compliant distribution for a monthly fee. Limits are real. RF is fickle, vibration is seasonal, temperature flicker shrinks in a narrow climate band, rectifiers leak, capacitors age. Loads must be ruthlessly small and patient, but those are engineering curves, not theology. Boards now run on microwatts, wake on motion, transmit in milliseconds, sleep for weeks, and borrow diversity from the environment. A little RF here, some tremor there, a daily breath from the wall, sunlight when it visits. The constraint, don't send unless you mean it, forces good design. Impact arrived in places that don't write memos. A bridge authority cut truck rolls by half when strained nodes lived off traffic vibration. A water utility used analog classifiers at the edge with scavenged power to distinguish leaks from construction noise. No cloud, no subpoenas, just counts. A warehouse printed e-ink labels powered by RFID reflections and stopped paying a subscription for screens that failed at the rate of their batteries. The bills that didn't arrive never made news. Defense validated the hunch quietly. In disaster drills, teams dropped phone-free terrain networks with harvesters and watched them run for weeks without logistics tails. After action notes read, resiliency unaffected by prolonged outage. The finding never made a civilian standard. Civilian standards made enrollment portals instead. The human cut holds it together. A teenager on a farm learned to flash firmware before a carrier update locked sideloading. A janitor in a tower tapped a tag that lived on the air and cleaned the right floor at the right hour without anyone's permission. A nurse checked a bed that finally told the truth about whether a patient was there. None of them paid a monthly fee for the privilege. That's what the fight is about, not Watts, custody, who decides whether a whisper is enough. Synthetic fuels that break the barrel. While harvesters quietly starved small bills, the fuel fight went for the throat. Liquids you can make anywhere that pour, store, and fly. Not corn politics, drop-in molecules, diesel, kerosene, gasoline made from carbon pulled back out of the air and hydrogen split from water. The physics is old. The economics finally blinked. That's when the levers came out. Stakes first, liquid fuels aren't just energy, they're control systems. Pipelines lock in take or pay contracts that sit under municipal budgets. Refinery throughput props up debt. Ports and tank farms are bargaining chips in elections. If a town can print 5,000 barrels a day from wind and waste, the leverage moves from maps to weather reports. If a base can make its own jet fuel, convoys shrink, and so does the room for pressure. Action looked like this. In 2019, a municipal waste-to-energy plant on the plains plumbed its stack. They captured Fluco-2 that used to drift into the sky, signed a night-rate deal for surplus wind, and fed green hydrogen with captured carbon into a shipping container reactor with ruthenium-doped catalysts tuned for Fischer-Tropsch. Out came a steady stream of synthetic diesel that met ASTM D975. The city buses ran cleaner. Mechanics logged normal wear. The mayor cut a ribbon beside a placard that said circular. Then emails got strange. The grid operator reopened their interconnection study over harmonics concerns from electrolyzers they'd already modeled. An insurance writer doubled premiums for novel process risk. A regional refinery offered a strategic partnership. The city declined. Weeks later, a venture fund tied to midstream interests bought a controlling stake. A pause for optimization became a strategic review. Staff told friends the unit hit spec. The public line said timing. Meanwhile, defense ran the same play without press. A coastal base used off-peak nuclear at night to split hydrogen, pulled CO2 from seawater with membranes, and synthesized JP-8. Engines wore normally, sulfur surprises never arrived. Reports stayed inside, orders did not. The point wasn't carbon virtue, it was logistics. Fuel made at the edge doesn't need an escort. In aviation, a catalyst shop cracked a cheaper path to e-kerosene at modest pressure. In 2021, an airline blended 10% at one airport tank farm for a week. Pilots noticed nothing, which was the win. Then came the familiar pivot. An oil-aligned investment vehicle took majority control. The new CEO reframed the business as carbon management services. The airline renegotiated supply timing. Scientists got retention packages and new titles. The plant slipped into slide decks. Stakes hit spreadsheets people don't show in hearings. If a city can produce a slice of diesel locally, pipeline tariffs lose bite. If regional airports can blend their own kerosene, supply shocks soften. If ports can turn captured CO2 and cheap wind into bunker fuel, routes and rates shift. Each percent made locally isn't just a carbon story, it's a leverage story. Resistance arrived dressed as prudence. Permits stalled on novel emissions characterization for units with no net emissions beyond what they consumed. Interconnect reviews looped as standards committees harmonized requirements for power quality filters already installed. Insurance underwriters priced risk as if every vessel might explode. None of it said no. All of it said not yet. Then narrative joined. A think tank with donors in the usual places published Net Zero Theater, arguing synthetic fuels entrench combustion. True in one slice. Also true, fleets don't evaporate when you pass a bill. Airframes fly for decades. Diesel engines haul food. You can't swap every turbine and truck on a schedule that pleases a press release. A bridge fuel that drops into existing hardware isn't theater, it's triage. Micro-stories cut the abstractions. A fishing co-op on a volcanic island used surplus geothermal to split hydrogen, captured CO2 from a brewery, and blended fuel for boats. Diesel shipments dropped 18% in 6 months. Their distributor suddenly offered loyalty discounts. Their bank asked for updated collateral valuations tied to their fuel contracts. Credit is a lever too. In a desert city, a utility signed a night rate PPA to feed a CO2 to methanol unit serving delivery fleets. County permits cleared. State approval stalled over a year-long stacked data request for a test variance measured in months. The variance was for testing. The loop ate itself. The startup burned cash, then accepted an acquisition with a familiar clause, portfolio alignment. Limits exist. Electrolyzers want cheap power around the clock. Catalysts foul and need regeneration. Carbon capture from air is expensive, from flue gas and seawater easier but still not free. Storage and blending need real oversight. But those are engineering curves and they're bending. PEM costs fall with factory scale. Solid oxide units like heat, modular reactors don't need refineries to justify themselves, and catalysts now live longer between refreshes. The unusual pattern isn't physics, it's tempo. When the math starts to pencil, someone moves the goalposts. Impact shows up in emergencies. A winter storm iced highways, tankers idled offshore. A hospital's diesel tank ran low. In a utility yard, a mothballed synth unit still had bottled CO2 and a rack of hydrogen. A technician spun it up and drummed 20 gallons by midnight. The ICU stayed lit. No press release. Just a machine doing what pipelines couldn't that night. The aftertaste is policy. If you want synthetic fuels to be more than ribbon cuts, lock the choke points open. Write interconnect rules that can't be reopened mid-pilot. Create insurance pools for certified units so novelty doesn't price out reality. Publish performance and emissions to public registries so smears have to argue with data, not vibes. And keep ownership distributed enough that buyouts can't bury a catalyst in a portfolio nap. Because once a town replaces even a slice of imports with molecules made from its own wind and waste, the barrel stops being a permission slip and starts being a preference. And preferences are hard to police.